Hi everyone, welcome to another Martini Monday. It's Tony's turn this week and he's making margaritas.
Yeah, we're going to keep summer going even though we're past Labor Day. So, of course, it's a tequila-based drink. You can use any kind of tequila. I'm going to use a Reposado. If you want to get really fancy, you can use a mezcal. But we're going to start with 2 parts per cocktail, 2 ounces of the tequila. And then we're going to do 1 ounce per cocktail of freshly squeezed lime juice. The freshly squeezed is critical. And then this is where a little bit of debate occurs. Some bartenders say orange liqueur and simple syrup. I prefer just orange liqueur, but don't use triple sec. Use something a little nicer. Gran Gala is a nice option. I use 3/4 of an ounce per cocktail of this. And then my secret ingredient are these chipotle cacao bitters.
Chipotle?
Mm-hmm. So you're going to get some spice and a little bit of that sort of sweet earthiness from the cocoa. But these are by Bittercube, which are kind of hard to find in Jacksonville. You probably have to order them online, but they are well worth it. Excellent, excellent bitters, craft bitters company. I'm going to use about 2 dashes per cocktail of this. Okay. And we have our ice shaker. I use a double shaker, not a Boston one. You shake it for about 25 or 30 seconds. And then you have the option, you can do it on the rocks, in a rocks glass. I like mine up in a coupe.
Me too.
No salt on the rim.
Why don't you like salt?
I think if you're making a good margarita, which I always do, is just taking away from it a little bit. I think salt is excellent if you're making a right margarita.
How come it's pink and not green?
I think it's just the light in your kitchen.
Alright.
All right, well, here we are. Here's the summer.
Cheers. Here's to the end of the summer of 2020, which
Right.
definitely deserves a cheers. Goodbye, summer 2020.
Indeed. Cheers. Well, we are finally here. It's almost the start of the season, and we've been spending a lot of the last few months retooling the season quite a bit. And that's because with the onset of COVID and many safety protocols to be considering, we've had to do away with repertoire that required more musicians than we can now fit on stage with physical distancing between each musician. So, what are some of these big changes that we've made so far?
So we've got 53 musicians max on stage with everybody sitting 6 feet apart. So what that essentially means is that we have a chamber orchestra. So I actually really enjoyed doing all this reprogramming because it reminded me of when I used to run Discovery Ensemble a few jobs ago, which was also a chamber orchestra. One of the challenges that you have when you are working with that number of musicians is avoiding just playing classical repertoire all the time. When I say classical, I mean music from the classical period, so Mozart, Beethoven and Haydn. It's very easy to get stuck in just playing a lot of that music all the time. So we do have lots of it though. So to start off that, we have lots of Beethoven symphonies. Fanfare opens with the 5th. Towards the end of the season we have the 3rd, Eroica. Masterworks 1 is Beethoven's 8th symphony. Mozart we have Jupiter Symphony, Prague Symphony, and
The ballet music from Idomeneo.
Idomeneo and Masterworks 1. There's going to be lots and lots of Haydn next year, so we're saving that until then. So we've got the kind of classical cornerstones covered, but then we've deliberately tried to program music that's outside those periods. So the hardest thing to do for a chamber orchestra is to play romantic music, because romantic music usually takes 100 musicians.
A lot of strings.
Yeah. Lots of extras. So we've tried to find ways of keeping that repertoire in the mix for a smaller group. So we have some music by Wagner. We have, is it Siegfried?
Siegfried Idyll.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then the thing that I'm most excited about in the whole season is Mahler's great symphony song cycle, Das Lied von der Erde, the Song of the Earth. But instead of using the usual one, which is enormous, we're using a version that was made by Schoenberg at the beginning of World War One, when everything was reduced and you couldn't get a big orchestra together. And Schoenberg and Mahler began a society that would play what was then contemporary music to introduce audiences to it, but in smaller arrangements. There's a very famous arrangement of Mahler's Fourth Symphony. So it's like a little mini chamber orchestra version of Das Lied, still really powerful. So that's going to be a really exciting thing.
And that features a couple of vocalists, so it's combining poetry and great vocals with a very symphonic scoring, and it's nearly an hour long just itself, so it's an entire concert. It's
really like Mahler's 11th Symphony. It's a huge big piece. And then towards the end of the season we also have Richard Strauss's great tone poem Metamorphosin, which is written for 23 solo strings. That's a tone poem that he wrote towards the end of World War II, and it's a kind of requiem for German culture, everything that was being bombed and that was dying. And towards the end of the piece, he actually quotes the theme from the slow movement of Beethoven's Eroica Symphony, which is also on that program.
Which is looked at by many as one of the early hallmarks of German Romanticism, because of that interesting chord at the very beginning of the opening of the piece.
Yes.
So it's a really clever program. I really like that. It's kind of the bookends of this massive cultural movement that spanned about 150 years.
Then also we tried to, everything this year has been about reducing cost, because it's just such a difficult time for us, having had to cancel all these concerts. So one of the ways that we looked at doing that was to feature soloists from the orchestra instead of bringing in lots of guest artists. So even though we will have some great guest vocalists, as Tony just mentioned, and we'll have Joshua Roman, the fantastic cellist, playing the Prokofiev Sinfonia Concertante, but apart from that, the soloists are being drawn from the orchestra. So two really special programs will be one that features the Britten Serenade for tenor, horn and strings, and will feature Kevin Reed, our fantastic first horn, in that. And what's the other one?
On one of the coffee concerts.
Oh yes. Yeah.
We have Mozart's Clarinet Concerto paired with the Elgar Enigma Variations.
Right, and that's with Giovanni, our wonderful new principal clarinet. That's going to be really nice to hear him play Mozart with that beautiful sound that he creates. So the programming is as varied as it could possibly be, even though we've had to rejiggle things. Yeah. But it doesn't feel like we've lost a great deal. That's what I'm excited about. This is still a season full of music that you'll love. And there are still some things that you won't know. For example, there's a great piece by James Macmillan, the Scottish composer who's in his 60s now. The piece that he became famous with at the 1990 BBC prom, so exactly 30 years ago, is a piece entitled The Confession of Isabel Gowdy. And Isabel Gowdy was a Scottish woman who was accused of witchcraft in the 16th century. There were lots of women who were accused of witchcraft. Anyway, there were lots of women were accused of witchcraft at this time in history, and Isabel Gowdy is one of them, and she's burnt at the stake. And this is this very dramatic tone poem that tells that story, very arresting story.
And what's exciting is we were going to originally open the season with a piece by James
Macmillan.
Yeah, his percussion concerto called Veni Veni Emmanuel, and we were going to have this spectacular percussionist, Scottish himself, Colin Curry, come and be the guest soloist for that. However, because of travel restrictions, he's not able to fly from the UK over here. So instead, we are opening the season with the wonderful violinist James Ennis, who we've had here recently for the Elgar Violin Concerto.
Which is not a performance I'm ever going to forget. I doubt anybody who ever heard it will, because James is just spectacular.
Yeah.
And we're so lucky that he lives in Orlando.
Yeah.
So he's just going to drive up and play Mendelssohn on September 26th at Fanfare.
To open the season, and that's going to be really exciting. I'm also looking forward to a piece that may be new to some people that is just hauntingly, not just hauntingly beautiful, but just haunting, period, is Bartók's Music for Strings, Percussion, and Celesta. It paints a sound world unlike anything else on the season, and that's another really creative use of the smaller forces that we have at our disposal this season.
Yeah, so that piece, the Music for Strings, Percussion and Celesta, is written for 2 string orchestras that sit opposite each other and play back and forth. And then in the middle of the orchestra is a xylophone, some other percussion instruments, and a celesta, which is the instrument that you'll all know from Sugar Plum Fairy from Tchaikovsky, the twinkly glass bars instrument.
Yeah.
My roommate's return.
Yeah.
It's a piece that was written in the 1930s as authoritarianism was creeping across Europe. And Bartók paints this very dark, sinister picture. If any of you know his night music from the string quartets or from the Concerto for Orchestra, this is a piece that has a number of movements that sound like insects crawling in the middle of the night. And it's a very eerie, powerful, and completely masterful piece.
Yeah.
Very much looking forward to that.
So in addition to a lot of these great works, we have a few guest conductors coming in this year. And we're welcoming back Matthew Halls, who is the brilliant British conductor.
Is this third time now? Yeah.
This will be it would have been his third, but he had a program this past spring that was canceled during the early period of the lockdown. And so this will be his second time back. He was last here conducting Mendelssohn's Reformation Symphony and some Bach. And he'll be doing a little bit more Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, which is actually one of my favorites. And also we're going to feature the organ on that program with an organ concerto. So we'll be welcoming Tom Wilkins, who will be conducting Poulenc's Sinfonietta and Tchaikovsky's gorgeous Serenade for Strings. And also Gonzalo Farias, our associate conductor, will have his first subscription week.
It's exciting.
And Dvorak's New World, and a very exciting premiere for the Jacksonville Symphony by a young composer named Jessie Montgomery, who I think is really promising, and her career is really taking off.
Really exciting piece. The piece is called Banner, and it's based on the American national anthem. And her question is, how do we play that today in times of great political strife? And she mulls it over and thinks about it, and the piece is kind of a meditation on that national anthem. And of course that's lovely to put with Dvorak's Ninth Symphony from the New World,
Yes.
his manifesto for what American music could be. So that works really nicely together.
Yeah, and toward the end of the season we welcome for the first time Giordano Bellincampi, who is music director way out with the Auckland Symphony Orchestra. And he'll be conducting the Wagner Siegfriediddle that you mentioned, and a very unconventional piece by Richard Strauss. Most people think of him as very late romantic, but he also dabbled a little bit in neoclassicism and neo-baroque. So this dips its toe in that.
It's the Le Bourgeois
Gentilhomme, which was incidental music for a play about a nouveau riche guy who thought that his new riches were going to be his ticket to posh comfort and high society. So
extremely strange piece. It sounds like a very peculiar birth child between Richard Strauss and Stravinsky. It's a strange mixture.
And that reminds me, one of the pieces I'm most excited about that we haven't mentioned is Stravinsky's Symphony in C, which we were to have performed this past spring as part of the Shift Festival program. And that's a piece that's dear to you.
Well, it's one of my favorite pieces of Stravinsky. Stravinsky's one of my favorite composers, and it's Stravinsky's take on a Beethoven symphony. In his neoclassical period, he looked at models from the past and then wrote his own version. So Dumbarton Oaks is like a Bach Brandenburg concerto, and the concerto in D is like an early Baroque string concerto, and the symphony in C is like a Beethoven symphony. It's fiendishly difficult. It's the most complicated rhythmical thing that he ever constructed, but very powerful and very beautiful. And it ends with one of my favorite things in all of music. The very end of the symphony is this very strange, slowly moving wind chorale. It's quite jazzy, but sort of smoky and profound at the same time. One of my favorite things from the whole 20th century.
It's kind of interesting how because the composition of that symphony took place in a very distinct period of transition in his life. The first half was composed in Europe, and the second half in LA mostly. You hear such a drastic change throughout this piece.
A lot happens.
Yeah.
But the main thing is that we are just so looking forward to seeing you all again, in Jacoby Symphony Hall to performing for you and to finally be getting back to normal.
Yeah.
With the test concerts next week and then Fanfare the week after, or Masterworks one the week after that.
Yeah.
It's been sad to be away from everybody, and it's going to be really great to be performing again.
Yeah, and make sure to bring your mask when you come to the concert hall.
Yes, of course. There's lots of very strict safety protocols. The concerts don't have any intermissions. All the concerts are about an hour long, and because we can only fill a third of the hall, or slightly less than a third, tickets are going to be quite limited as well. So please book early so that you don't get disappointed.
Absolutely.
And we look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, looking forward to it.